एक और जहां मुमकिन है, एक और जहां मुमकिन है, एक और जहां मुमकिन है.
Good afternoon and welcome to Speaking Truth to Empire on KFCF 88.1 FM, independently owned and locally operated since 1975 in Fresno. My name is Yaseen and I'm an anti-war and anti-empire activist. Rich Withers is at the controls. Today is April 21st, 2021, third Wednesday of the month. Every third Wednesday, I interview authors, scholars, bloggers, columnists, and activists who help us look at our world through the prism of American imperialism. On the show, we talk about U.S. foreign and domestic policies and the actions of the military, industrial, media, congressional surveillance complex. These actions have severe consequences, not only for the people here in America, but also for people in other countries. Today we have Jeff J. Brown on telephone with us. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Dan.
Thank you for being my guest on the show. Jeff J. Brown is the editor of China Rising Radio Sinoland, producer of China Tech News Flash, author of the China Trilogy, a co-founder and curator of the Bioweapon Truth Commission Global Online Library. Jeff, as President Biden approaches his first 100 days in office, we see that he signed many presidential orders to implement changes in domestic policies. But as far as the foreign policy is considered, it is very obvious that the status quo is here to stay. American imperialism will continue, American wars will continue, American bombing of 7 Muslim countries will continue. He's continuing Trump's foreign policy and even has increased his China and Russia bashing. Last month, on the March 16th, in an interview with George Stephanopoulos, he called Vladimir Putin a soulless killer and that he will have to pay a price. 2 days later, addressing the Chinese diplomat, Secretary of State Tony Blinken excoriated China for threatening the rule-based international order, which is necessary for a global safety. Jeff, I would like you to tell our audience how Russia and China responded to these atrocities, and which was, of course, not covered in the media here. And if it was embellished. So give us how they responded and your take on the whole situation.
Yes, the situation right now in Asia is not looking good for Western Empire. There is what I am now calling the Asian Quad as a riposte to the United States' Quad with India, Australia, the United States, and I'm leaving out one country, Japan, and which are just have nothing in common. But the Asian Quad is North Korea, Russia, China, and now China just signing a treaty, $400 billion 25-year treaty with Iran. So these 4 countries have the entire Asian landmass under their control and outside of the control of the United States and Europe. So it's a nightmare for Western Empire because remember Zbigniew Brzezinski, he always talked about we have to be able to control the axis, that east-west axis of Asia, in order to control the world, which is why he and Jimmy Carter went into Afghanistan in 1980 was to try to break that a lock that at that time the Soviet Union had on the Asian landmass. Now China and Russia are just like practically, bosom buddy allies. They are. The DPRK has an excellent relationship with Iran and Russia and China. And Russia is now developing a similar commercial type treaty with Iran, which will be, I'm sure, signed in the next 2 or 3 years. So this is the desperation. I mean, total, white knuckle fear desperation that Europe and the United States have. Of course, Europe is a vassal supine puppet of the United States in terms of foreign policy. So it's not looking good. And so, I mean, if you're Tony Blinken or Biden or Macron or Merkel or, Bojo in England, it's not looking good. The anti-imperial forces of the world have never been stronger than they are today.
Tell us more about how Putin responded to this undiplomatic utterance from Biden. Okay.
Well, what he did, he being a gentleman and a diplomat, he just said, well, that's in essence, he said, Biden is free to say whatever he wants about me. Why don't we have an open debate, like a televised or recorded, discussion together to talk about it? Well, of course, Biden is so mentally handicapped. I mean, he obviously has problems with dementia. I don't know if it's as bad as Alzheimer's, but he clearly has, problems with dementia. He could not carry on a discussion with Putin in public. He would be destroyed. China, China is no longer going to be the uber diplomat with the United States. They are now really coming out with sort of, Mao Zedong era. Mao Zedong was one of the great rhetorical anti-imperial voices in the 1950s, going back to the 1920s all the way up until the 1970s. He was devastating to Western empire. And you can see now that China has had it. The Xinjiang, this complete fabrication of quote genocide in Xinjiang is just an absolute mirage. The insults that they publicly, Blinken and Sullivan made to Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi in Anchorage, they've had it, and now they are coming back, in grand Mao fashion, and calling American empire a paper tiger, just like Mao did 70 years ago. So I think to be honest, Dan, I think what happened is both Russia and China thought, well, maybe Trump was an aberration. Things are going to get better after Trump. Trump was a clown, a boisterous, populist, demagogue. And I think they thought that things were going to kind of return to normal. I mean, Biden and Blinken make Trump and Mike Pompeo look like, international statesmen. The Biden administration is so off the charts; they have no idea what they're doing in terms of foreign policy, or if they do, they are doing a horrible job. I think they're just desperate to try to crush Russia and China. It's too late. It's game over. And now with Iran and DPRK, the four of those countries, basically controlling the entire Asian continent, other than South Central India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan is a Chinese ally. So it's just this is what's going on. They just they can sanction and boycott and embargo and fine all they want. China and Russia and Iran and the DPRK are just going to go right along with their business and integrate Asia, the great Asian landmass, with the Belt and Road Initiative, which now runs all the way from Southeast Asia to Portugal.
As you mentioned about how undiplomatic the U.S. presidents and other diplomats are, I mean, you don't expect these kind of behavior in spite of, as you said, that China and Russia both are getting tough, but they still have what I would call diplomatic protocols that they follow. Like just yesterday, President Xi Jinping addressing the conference, he talked against, warns against unipolarism without naming the United States.
Yes, they are very reluctant to. They don't like to name names. He talked about that certain countries, that the world is getting tired of certain countries trying to impose their hegemonic, rule over the rest of the world. Of course, everybody that has any knowledge of the headlines knows he was talking about the United States and Europe, and it's not just the United States. Europe is the puppet of the United States and in terms of foreign policy. So look what Europe is doing, with Ukraine right now, and the huge operation with 40,000 soldiers, marching up and down the border of Russia, and what's going on in the Donbass there. That is all that, Europe is fully involved with that. The Navalny affair, the Skripal affair. You cannot, and you can also throw in Israel. You cannot talk about American empire without talking about Europe, Israel, Australia, and New Zealand. So the Five Eyes, and Canada. So Lavrov, the amazing foreign minister of Russia, and unless they're insulted to their faces, the Chinese are also very diplomatic. But when you're sitting there and being absolutely insulted in front of cameras, that was when Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi took Tony Blinken and John Sullivan from the Department of State to task, because it was a huge loss of face for the Chinese. It's okay to say those kind of things behind closed doors, but you don't do it in front of cameras for the whole world to see. So yes, she was being very diplomatic, and the Russians are always diplomatic. I mean, look at Putin. He was called a soulless killer who would pay the price, and yet he came back, and just almost made light of it and said, well, let's talk about it. So yeah, the United, there's a great quote by Boutros Ghali, the former General Secretary of the United Nations, from Egypt. He in his personal letters after he was the General Secretary, because if he said that while he was General Secretary, he might have been killed like Dag Hammarskjöld was assassinated by the CIA. One of the first general secretaries of the UN was killed by the CIA because he was a socialist. But in his private letters afterwards, he said, I went to diplomacy school and went to university, and unfortunately, what I've learned is that Americans don't do diplomacy. The Americans look upon diplomacy as a sign of weakness. He said empires like Rome never did diplomacy. It was just, telling people what they had better do. And he said American empire also does not do diplomacy. So this is pretty standard. The difference is that at least, previously, and even Trump, if they had something to say, they at least did it behind closed doors. Now with Biden, they're doing it out in the open.
Yes. You're listening to Speaking Truth to Empire on KFCF 88.1 FM, independently owned and locally operated since 1975 in Fresno. We are speaking with author, blogger, editor, talk show host, and anti-Western imperialism activist Jeff J. Brown. Despite atrocious American, China, Russia bashing, both China and Russia are, as you have been talking about, are pursuing diplomacy. In the last few days, both countries, both China and Russia, have called for the talks on space arms control. For several years, the United States has been deploying its armed forces on Russian border, as you mentioned earlier, and its Navy, since Obama started pivot to Asia in South China Sea. I mean, they are really pushing, yes, being not diplomatic is one thing, but they are really pushing the world more towards nuclear war. It's a big danger. What are the consequences of these provocation that U.S. is doing?
Well, right now, the scariest thing, or the scariest scenario, Dan, is that Biden has taken the baton from Trump and has even gone further and is sending diplomats and dignitaries to Taiwan, which ever since Richard Nixon in 1972 in the United Nations, everybody almost everybody. There's a few island countries in the Pacific, but everybody in the world recognizes one China and that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. Biden is even going further with Blinken. They're essentially flashing the green light to Taiwan about declaring their independence. If that happens, I can promise you that within 24 hours there will be Chinese soldiers landing in Taiwan. That is a red line that China will not tolerate. They took care of Hong Kong by finally passing the national security law so they could arrest all these turncoats and saboteurs, in Hong Kong who were using Hong Kong as a platform to destabilize China. Macau has always is practically already a part of China. Tibet, not a lot's going on. Nothing's going on in Xinjiang that the West can do except just blatant lies and propaganda against Xinjiang. But Taiwan is a serious concern. So if Biden and Blinken continue, and China has been giving some signals that you keep sticking your finger in our eye about Taiwan. I'm being metaphorical, of course, but if you keep sticking your finger in our eye about Taiwan, they may peremptorily do something to make sure that Taiwan does not declare independence. It's hard to say what's going to happen right now, but for one thing, it's already been decided by China, either through economic pressure or military attack. China will become unified by 2049, which would be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. So it could happen sooner. Then you have, this ridiculous situation where NATO and the Secretary of Defense from the United States giving all these green lights to the Ukraine, which is a fascist, neo-Nazi hellhole, overrun with real live Nazis with swastikas. That's who's running Ukraine. All in agreement. All agreed with by Europe and Western Empire, threatening to try to take the Donbass area, the rebel areas of the Donbass by force. It looks like they're trying to get the Russians to pull the trigger first, so they can accuse Russia of being the aggressor. But what would happen if even if Russia doesn't pull the trigger first, it doesn't matter, because with the Western propaganda, the big lie propaganda machine, they can just say that Russia was first, and everybody will believe it. Mm-hmm. But Putin is already. They have already, Lavrov and Putin have already told Biden and Blinken. Blinken's mother is of Ukrainian origin, and so Blinken's mother is of Ukrainian origin. They've already said, you will regret any attempt to try to invade the rebel zones of the Donbass in Lugansk and Donetsk. I don't know what that means. I'm sure they have been told privately what it means, but it's just Western Empire is failing against all these communist, socialist, anti-imperialist countries, be it the Quad, the Asian Quad I mentioned, be it Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Venezuela, Cuba, now Bolivia again, Argentina, anti-imperialist. There is just Peru just elected a unionist as president. So it's whack-a-mole for Western Empire. It's just total whack-a-mole. They cannot keep all these countries down and oppressed and invaded and occupied like they were able to do after World War II and in the 50s and 60s. In the 70s, those days are over. So you can just see the desperation, the absolute desperation of Western Empire, because they're losing control. And this Chinese, Russian, Iranian idea of a multipolar world, a new economy, not based on the dollar, it's really starting to take hold, and that's where you again get worried about. Will the West and Israel resort to nuclear war in order to try to save their evil empire?
Well, as you had been saying, that U.S. has been conducting what is called hybrid wars against Russia, China, Iran, North Korea for many years now. And of course, they come in the form of information, trade war, economic war, and kind of sanctions. So they've been doing it, and now it's finally, as you had said a couple of times, that the Asian Quad and the countries are standing up, and they are realizing that the unipolar moment, which started about 30 years ago, is over. But it's just the U.S. leaders, especially the presidents and the diplomats, and all the secretaries of state or secretary of defense, they are having trouble recognizing it. And as you said earlier also, is that the Chinese-Russian model, China became Chinese rise, economic rise, has been a peaceful one. They did not threaten anybody. They did not exploit anyone, and their rise has been cooperative and a win-win strategy as opposed to the U.S. model, which is a zero-sum game. Give us your take on that. Yeah.
Very well said. Well, yeah. It's just this is where we are. This whole idea of the rules-based order that America talks about, and its allies and friends. America's allies and friends are America's lapdogs, poodles who take orders from Washington and do as they are told. The rules-based order is we exploit you, we invade whoever we want, we occupy whoever we want, we declare war on whoever we want, we send drones wherever we want, we do false flags like the chemical attack in Syria whenever we want. All these ships that are being supposedly hit, in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, those are false flags to try to attack Iran. So this is it, and it used to work. It used to work, but now, America is in decline. Europe. I live here in France. France is in decline. This, the neoliberal, ultra neoliberal austerity, people, the standards of living are dropping, infrastructure is suffering. It's not fun living in the West anymore. And where are people the happiest and the most optimistic? Well, in countries like Russia and China, where incomes are going up, prospects are looking good, the future looks bright, and there is a sense of solidarity, which is a word that Americans wouldn't know if it hit them in the face. There's a sense of solidarity with all of these communist, socialist, anti-imperialist countries joining hands for a multipolar, win-win, mutually beneficial global peace. And that's what we've got to fight for it and talk about it and keep our fingers crossed that Washington, Tel Aviv, or the UK does not pull the trigger, the nuclear trigger, or France even, because they've got nuclear weapons too. That's the scary part.
Yes,
so that's where we're at.
Exactly right. And as you said, comparing the two sides, China, what it has done in the last 30 years or so, it's unprecedented, getting 850 million people out of poverty. While in the West, especially in the United States, poverty on the rise. More and more people are going below the poverty line.
Absolutely, yeah. And that started in 1949 with the liberation of China from Western Empire, communism and socialism. This is ultimately a gigantic, titanic battle between Western capitalism and Eastern socialism and communism. And Russia, Russia's not communist, but it has a huge holdover.
Jeff, Jeff, we have less than 1 minute left, so please quickly give us what website that our listeners can go to follow the wonderful work you are doing.
Well, just go to www.chinarising.punto.com, or just Google, search Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, and you will find my work.
Thank you, Jeff, for being my guest.
Thank you for having me on.
You're listening to Speaking Truth to Empire on KFCF 88.1 FM, independently owned and locally operated since 1975 in Fresno. We were speaking with author, blogger, editor, talk show host and anti-Western imperialism activist Jeff J. Brown. Thank you for listening. My name is Dan Yaseen, host of the show. I will be back third Wednesday of next month.